from 1965. A time to live, a time to die. And I never have paid much attention to the song, but this week, since that was a scripture reading, I always just assumed that it was probably far away from the scripture, but it's not. It's practically verbatim, and that's what it says. That's the whole song is those 8 or 10 verses there. I thought that was interesting. I gave the song to Alexis this morning, and the scripture reading. She listened to the song, read the scripture. She says, "I don't get it." I can't help you. But time. And when you read there, there's a lot of times. A time for this, a time for that, a time for this, a time for that. And I thought about that this week, and I know Wednesday night, guy, he asked me, he says, what are you going to preach on Sabbath? And I said, Mr. Guy, I absolutely do not have a clue. And he laughed at me. And I think it was Thursday morning or yesterday morning, I got up and I thought, I was thinking about work and everything and getting ready and how tightly framed my life is. I pretty much have got it down, my daily routine down to the minute. Everything just, and I get tired of that. I would like to be one of those people who could go home in the afternoon and be like, what am I going to do this evening? I fantasize about that. And I was a little frustrated, and I mumbled to myself, there's no time. I don't have enough time. There's not enough time to do anything. Not enough time. Everything, every minute, every second of my life is taken up with something. And I thought, that's what I'll preach on. Time. So that's how you got your sermon there today. But time. And does it really even exist, time? Mathematicians and scientists and different people would argue that it does, and perhaps it's something that even has dimensions and we could travel through it and go back in time or forward to time and all these different things. But does time really even exist? I mean, what is time, really? It's a measurement that we've got, these seconds and these minutes and these hours, and it's a measurement between now and later, or between now and then. And you can measure the events between now and then or now and later by this, what we call time. That was 3 hours ago. It was 30 minutes ago. It was 4 days ago, 25 years ago. I remember when I was young, somebody would say, that was 30 years ago. And I used to think, man, that was like back in the history books, it's so old. I couldn't even imagine 30 years ago. And now that you get older, I think I could almost hold my breath for 30 years. You know I can hold it for 10 years. I mean, that's nothing, right? And you laugh at young people. Like Lexa, sometimes she makes the statement, I've done such and such my whole life. I'm like, woo. I've got clothes that old. And that's just the way time is. When you're young, it seems like you've just got an abundance of it. I remember I would get out in the summertime for school in elementary school, and our summer break was about 4 years long. It seemed that way. I mean, going back to school was starting over every year. It's hard to believe that it was only 3 months. It seemed like a lifetime, man. When school was out for the summer, man, you was done, man. Now, 3 months. You just got 3 months. You're already starting. You need to get prepared for it because it's not far away. But it seems like the older you get, the tighter time gets. The tighter it gets, the older you get. And everything is in time. Everything that works is all in time. Car engines, they got to be exactly on time or they won't run right. The world, it's got to be spinning just the right amount of speed, and the solar system and everything's got to be spinning just right. It's all got to be in time. If it's not, it won't work right. And God set everything in time when he made it. He made everything, and you know, that's what our time is based on, how fast the world spins and how fast it goes around the sun and the solar system. And everything is in perfect timing. Time. And God set all that in time. And I was thinking about time, and I think a lot of times about why God does things. We got to eat. Some of us eat too much. You get fat. But you got to eat. You can't just not eat. And why did God make us when we eat? Why didn't he just make us like plants? You go outside and it's photosynthesis and the sun, you just grow. And everybody was just a perfect size. Just drink a little water every now and then. Or we could have been like nuclear reactors, you know, just charged from birth. And God could have done that. You don't agree? He could have done that. But he's got all these things, and there's reasons why he does everything. And I was thinking about time and how he made the earth in 6 days. He made the earth in 6 days and put all that in place, and the timing mechanism and everything was in place, and the solar system, everything was working great in 6 days. But God is so awesome. He says, you know what? He says, I'm going to make it one more extra day. Number 7. And we say, oh man, good. Finally, we've got an extra day. And God says, I want you to give it to me. Right? That's my day. 14% of our time. And so when you look in the book of Genesis, and I was thinking about all this time, and God is really a timely person. He's on time always, and he seems to be use time. And I think this is the reason God gave us time, so we could measure things and so we could see how great God truly is. And when you look at Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, these guys, he says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, and yet his days, man's days. We're talking about man's days here. His days shall be 120 years. First time prophecy in the Bible. You get that? Do you see that? Man's years shall be 120 years. Is that what it says? It says man's days shall be 120 years. That's the first prophecy given in the Bible. Now, when you want to find out something about prophecy, we want to find out about the soul, right? What do? We go back to Genesis and we say, all right, how did God make a man? What is a soul? And it says God made man from the dust of the earth. He breathed into his nostrils, and then man became a living soul. And that's all the ingredients, the breath of God, the dirt from the ground, put together, and you become a living soul. So we said that defines a soul. That's what a soul is. That's what we know that. You go back to Genesis, you say, when we're talking about prophecy, what kind of time does God use? There's your first prophecy. A day equals a year when he's giving you prophecy. And he goes to those guys, he said, you've got 120 years and it's going to be over. Now those guys had an advantage, didn't they? They knew the day and the hour. They knew when he was coming. What if he told us, your days shall be 8 years, then I'm coming. Your days shall be 20 years, and I'm coming. Well, we would do better than them, wouldn't we? It's easy to be Monday morning quarterback. I don't know. Have you ever thought about if you could go back in time and know what you know now, but be a kid again? Do you ever fantasize about that? Know what you know now, but go back to when you were 10 years old. Or maybe there's a particular spot, an event. I know the day and the event that I want to go back to. If I could go back. And some of you are shaking your head to no, you don't want to go back. And I've often wondered if I could go back, because I immediately think I could do better. But then sometimes I think about it and I think, I don't know if I could do better. I don't know if I could do better. Time. And in Genesis 15, verse 13, God's talking to Abraham there, and he says that your people are going to be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years. Gave him that. And then when we go to Genesis chapter 41, we've got Joseph there in Egypt, and the Pharaoh, he has this dream and about these cows, these 7 skinny cows and 7 fat cows. And Joseph says, you're going to have 7 good years, and then you're going to have 7 years of famine. Again, God ties it down, exact timing. Then I want you to go with me to 2 Kings chapter 20. 2 Kings chapter 20. 2 Kings chapter 20. And I want to begin there reading, with verse 6, I believe. 2 Kings chapter 20. And we're going to begin, or just look at verse 6. I'll tell you the story there. In chapter 20, verse 1, it begins. It says, in the days of Hezekiah, 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 1, in those days was Hezekiah sick unto death, and the prophet Isaiah came to see him, and he said unto him, thus said the Lord, put your house in order, for you're fixing to die. And then in verse 2, it says, he turned his face to the wall, and he prayed to the Lord. He said, I beseech thee, O Lord, remember now how I have walked before you in truth and in perfect heart, and have done that which is good in your sight. And Hezekiah, he wept, he cried a lot. He didn't want to die. I tell you something. I don't want to die. I have this strong will. Maybe I'm different than the rest of y'all, but I have this strong will to survive. I don't want to die. Okay, I don't like the thought of it. And Hezekiah, he cried, and I think I would have done the same thing. If God sent the prophet to me and says, get your stuff in order, Quentin, you're going to die, I think I would have rolled over in my bed against the wall, and I would have cried, and I would have begged God for life too. I don't think there's a thing wrong with that. Even Jesus prayed, Father, if it be possible, remove this cup from me. But not my will, thine be done. And it says it came to pass here in verse 4, before Isaiah was gone out into the middle of the court, that the word of the Lord came to him again. He said, go back and tell Hezekiah, the captain of my people, that the God of David and thy father, I have heard his prayer, and I have seen his tears, and behold, I will heal him. And on the 3rd day, you'll go up into the house of the Lord. And verse 6 says, and I will add unto your days 15 years. And now verse 7, and Isaiah said, take a lump of figs. And they took and laid it upon the boil that he had, and he recovered. And Hezekiah says here in verse 8, he says, what shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord on the 3rd day? And Isaiah said, this sign shalt thou have of the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he has spoken. And shall the shadow, get this, shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees or go back 10 degrees? And so he's talking about the sundial, right? And the sundial, where the sun went back or the sun went forward, the sundial is how they told the time. It was when the sun comes up or the earth goes around, the sun's coming up, the shadow moves. And you can tell what time it is by the sundial. And so really, he's just talking about the clock. He says, you want a sign? He says, all right, here's your sign. He says, do you want God to move the clock forward an hour, or do you want him to move time back an hour? Well, that's pretty good, ain't it? And Hezekiah says, and this always blows my mind. He answered, and he says, it's an easy thing to make it go down 10 degrees. It's easy to make time go faster. Anybody can do that. But I tell you, time does fly sometimes, does it not? Time seems like it goes by fast. You're at home, it's 3 o'clock, right? You walk to the living room, you come back, and it's 7 o'clock. You go to work, it's 1 o'clock. You work as hard as you can all day long for 8 hours. You look back at the clock, it's 1:05. That's the way it goes, ain't it? But he says, I want you to make it go backwards for an hour. and they moved the clock. The sun went backward. Time went backwards. The earth, you could probably hear it. Furniture and stuff sliding around. But somehow God made the shadow go backwards an hour. And it wasn't just a local thing, because the Babylonians saw it. And they said, man, what's going on? And word got around. They said, this dude over here was sick, and he asked his God to make time go backwards as a sign. And they even came over there and seen Hezekiah. Said, hey, man, what's going on? Why are you here? They said, well, we were worried about you. We heard you weren't feeling well. Brought him some gifts. But I give you a little hint. I don't think they were too worried about how he was feeling. They was worried about the time going backwards. How did you do that? We want to know that God. And old Hezekiah, I don't want to get sidetracked here off time, but old Hezekiah, he showed them everything in his house. He showed them how rich he was. He showed them all of his cars. He showed them all of his motorcycles, his big fancy limousines, and all of his servants and all of his money. Opened up the door on the bank and showed him all of his gold and treasure and everything, and his big screen televisions and the big computers and his fancy cell phones, and showed him everything that he had. And they said, man, that is awesome. The only thing he didn't show them was about God. And so they left. They got to think about all that nice stuff. And they come back later and they took it. That's what happens. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. You're supposed to take the blessings that God gives you and use that to glorify the Lord. Now, old Solomon, everything, just about everything in the Bible, there's a positive and a negative, same thing. Old Solomon, he had all this great stuff. And the Queen of Sheba come from the other side of the world. She had heard all that stuff too. She said, man, I got to see this. So she goes over. Solomon shows her everything. But what he tells her most about is the Lord and how the Lord has blessed him. Right? Solomon did it the right way. Poor old Hezekiah, he did it the wrong way. But God stopped the time and moved it backwards. Joshua chapter 10, verse 13. They was having a battle. I believe it was the Amorites. They were having a battle with one of the people, and God made the sun. He called upon God, and God made the sun set still for a day. Another day. Sat there for an extra day. How you like that? You're getting beat up, you're getting destroyed, you're getting whooped all over the place, and you're looking around and you say, well, it ain't got long, it's going to get dark, and at least we can run. And God says, we're going to make this last. And he stopped it for a day. Then in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10, he tells Israel, he says, you're going to go to Babylon, and you're going to be there for 70 years. He told them what it was going to be about. And evidently, they didn't even pay no attention to it. Because Daniel's reading there in chapter 9, and it says when he's reading, he says he saw there, that looking in the book of Jeremiah, that he understood that they were fixing to be set free because it had been 70 years. And that same prophecy, he knew the time was near. And we should be able to look at our Bibles and understand that the time is near. The time is near. And in Daniel chapter 8, he gave this prophecy of the 2,300 days. And we know from looking at Genesis that days are years. He said 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. And they added that up back there in the 1830s and stuff, and they come to the conclusion that it was 1844 when that 2,300 days would end, and they were right. Daniel 9 goes in depth, and I'm not going to go in depth with it, but Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 through 27 goes in depth and tells you the whole story. Jesus lays it all out in 457 BC. You're going to be freed from Babylon, and you're going to be allowed to rebuild your temple. And from 457 BC, you're going to go so many weeks, and then Jesus is going to be baptized in AD 27. And then he's going to bear with you for a week. But in the midst of the week, he's going to cause the sacrifice to cease. And after 7 more years, AD 34, the covenant will be conformed with many. But until that time, and we get all these prophecies. They're all time related. They're all there. Time. And what we get from this It's got this time, and it's a measurement of how many times that the earth goes around the sun, and when the earth goes around the sun so many times, this is going to happen. And when the earth spins around so many times, this is going to happen. Time. That's what it is. The earth is going to go around the sun 2,300 times. And after the earth goes around the sun 2,300 times, this is going to happen. Time. And what we get from this, and what we know from this, is that God is always on time, God owns time, and God controls time. Now that's awesome. That's something that we can only imagine. We make movies about people that have time machines. Got the movie, I don't know, it's got like 25 different parts. The Back to the Future, right? Back to the future again, forward to the future. All the back to the futures. And they always go back, and it's interesting. There's all kinds of movies based on time and time travel. We fantasize about being able to go back in time and do things, but God can actually control time. He made it. He can do it. It's amazing. Time. It's impossible for God to be late. God can't be late. Did you know that? If God were a man, and he went to work, and he was supposed to be to work at 9 o'clock. And he strolled in the office at 10:15. And the boss says, hey, you're late. It's 10:15. God could say, no, it's 9 o'clock. And the boss would be like, oh, yeah, it is 9 o'clock. Oh. He can't be late. Time is what he says it is. So therefore, when God says this prophecy is going to happen on this time in this many years, it's going to happen. Everyone has the same amount of time. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how fancy you are. We've all got the same time in a day. We've all got 24 hours, right? We've got so many minutes and so many seconds. We've all got the same amount of time. Some people do great things in those times, and others do nothing in those times. But we all got the same amount of time. So you can't say, you're not going to be able to get to heaven and say, well, God, I couldn't do as much as Cynthia done because she had 36 hours in the day and I only had 24. Not fair. We've all got the same time. And that's the wonderful thing about the Sabbath. I was talking to Pastor Cliff one day and I said, I wonder why the Sabbath? I said, I wonder why it all comes down to the Sabbath at the end. Why does it all come down to the Sabbath, do you think? And he says, because everybody has the same time. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor or whatever you are, anywhere you are on the world, everybody has the same amount of that. We've all got the same time, and you can choose to give it to the Lord or you can choose to take it from the Lord. That makes a lot of sense. God wouldn't say, thou who hast the most money shall be saved. Well, that'd be unfair. Christians be robbing banks, knocking off gas stations, everything else. We'd be trying to get all kinds of money, right? It wouldn't be fair to say that. He who has the longest life shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. He who has the tallest stature shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. But we've all got the same time. We've all got that time. And you work. Some people don't have enough time, right? I'm working on something, I'm building something, so I don't have enough time. So what do? You get some other people over there and you buy their time from them. And we sell our time. We go to work every day and we sell 8 hours of our time every day. We sell our time to somebody. And in turn, they give us money and we can live with it. That's what you do. You sell your time to someone. 8 hours. Then you sleep for 8 hours. And that only leaves you 8 hours. For 6 days. Because the seventh day is the Lord's. And I believe that's 48 hours. You've got 48 hours a week to do something. 48. I told Amanda the other day, we're having a church business meeting tomorrow. I believe it's 2 p.m. And I said, I can't believe that they're going to take 2 weeks to do a church board meeting. He says, what do you mean 2 weeks? I said, 2 weeks. I get 1 day. I got one day. I got Sunday. That's the day I've got to do everything, Sunday. And so we could have it at 5 a.m. We could come there at 5 a.m. We could get it done. I says, no. Someone has meticulously thought this out. And they said, we're going to have it at 2 o'clock. That way we'll give Quentin just enough time where he'll say, well, I can't start on that because I've got to go to church at 2. And so he can't really start on anything. And then we'll have the meeting. And what we'll have the meeting, we'll make it grueling. We'll drag that meeting out for 3 or 4 hours. And we'll just stay and just dwell on it and dwell on it. And then we'll drag it out so long, by the time it's done, he'll go home and say, well, it's fixing to get dark. I can't start anything now. And I said, I only got one day. So it takes up this whole week, that Sunday, and the next whole week. I said, it's 2 weeks. It's a 2-week board meeting. Right? And we will. We'll come here tomorrow, and somebody will say, well, and our budget is, I don't know, $1,600 a month or whatever it is. And now Cynthia has, I guarantee you, she has went through this with a comb. She's got it all spotted out and everything. The church insurance has went up 500% yearly like it always does. And so now she's got this number, and she says it's got to be, maybe it's $1,800 this year. And then we'll say, well, what about this yard mowing? This yard mowing is $50. And we'll go back and forth and back and forth. And back. It's rough. It takes my time. And I'm squirming in my seat. It takes my time. Time is tight. It's valuable, isn't it? It's valuable. And I had this guy, I was wanting a lawnmower, this push mower that I had, and this push mower, it had rotted out. And the engine on the push mower, the deck had rotted out, and the engine fell through the deck. That's how bad a shape it was. And so back at this time, you could buy a push mower for $85, brand spanking new. And I'd had that push mower for 1,000 years. And so I had it in the back of my truck to throw in the garbage. And the guy at work sees it. He says, hey, what's wrong with that push mower? I said, nothing, man. I said, it runs like a top. I said, but the deck's rotted plumb out on it. He says, you mind if I have it? I said, no, that's fine. Yeah, I said, you can have it. That'd be good. I'd rather you have it than me have to throw it away. So he takes it. He takes the motor off of it. He sandblasts the body. He gets metal. He puts in the deck. He welds it up. He takes and paints the mower. Puts it all back together, gets it running. He says, hey, you're stupid, man. He says, I got that mower working fine. All I did was weld it up, took the part fixed. I said, dude, I said, my time is worth more than that, right? I'd rather pay $85 for a new mower than spend 6 weeks fixing that one, right? And so you weigh stuff out. What is your time worth? My time is worth about $500 an hour. I wish I could get somebody to pay for it. But to me, my time is very valuable. Do you have valuable time? Is your time valuable? And the older you get, the more it's worth. Time is valuable. Now, here's where the old devil comes in. See, the devil knows what we don't know. Or at least what we act like we don't know. The Bible says that the devil knows that he has a short time. And so he's working hard to destroy the world. The devil knows that. The Bible talks about the last prophecy, and it says in Revelation chapter 10, verse 6, it says, "And time will be no more." Now it's talking about 1844. And it says after that, there's no more time prophecies. Because Jesus says in the book of Revelation, chapter 22, verse 12, he says, "Behold, I'm coming quickly." And that was 180 years ago. And he's coming quickly. And you say, oh man, it's been 180 years. Well, if he was coming quickly 180 years ago, how close do you think it is now? And look at the world. Look at the things going on. Jesus is coming soon. Time is short. Now, the devil knows this. And so he wants to blow your time and waste your time. That's what Satan wants to do. He just wants to stand around, block you, waste your time, consume your time with things that are, it don't even have to be something that's bad, but if it's something bad, he really likes it. But if he can just consume your time with things that don't pertain to salvation, he's got you. Satan would love for you to sit around and play video games all day long. He loves that. He'd love for you to blow your time and waste your time. He'd love for you to sit around and watch TV all day long and not do nothing, and sit around and do that stuff and do that instead of reading or studying or praying. And you know, when you do that all day, you watch the television shows and you play these video games and all these things that are going on, that's things that Satan makes to consume your time. See, in my day, we had to leave the house, get money, go to a store, an arcade somewhere, and put quarters in a game before we could play it. And if you lost, when you run out of quarters, it was over. And so you had to get good, right? And that was it. But no, Satan says, man, that's not good enough. I can come up with a way where I can just put it on our TVs and let them sit there all day long and play those games. Yeah, I can suck up all our time. I can suck it all up. And so Satan does these things trying to waste our time and take up this valuable time that we've got. And do you know, after doing all that stuff, after wasting all that time, you come to church, and church is boring. Do you know why church is boring? Church is boring to some people. Church is boring to some people because they don't have a good understanding of what the Bible is about. You at least have to have some understanding of God and what the Bible is about before it becomes enjoyable to you. If you don't know anything about it, it's not enjoyable to you. So it's hard. You got to get that in there where somebody knows at least a little something about the Lord to make church more enjoyable, because at least they will know what you're talking about. I was talking to someone just the other day. They were arguing with them about God and about the Bible. And the person told me, they said, I can't even argue with the person because they don't know enough about the Bible to argue with me. You know what I'm saying? Have you ever come across anybody like that? They don't know enough about what they're talking about to really have a good discussion. So the devil knows that he's got a short time, and he wants to waste your time and blow your time. And so I've got this ideal that I've had. And because you have to, and Jesus did that. He would walk up to fishermen and he would talk about fishing and he would tie it into God. Or he would go to a carpenter and he would talk about carpentry and he would tie it into God. He would meet the people where they were at. I had this thing, you know, I like cars and hot rods and stuff, and I'm always doing that. And there's so many things about motors and engines and stuff like that that tie in so well with God. Just, you can. And gear ratios and oil and forged versus non-forged and different things. But that's not interesting to most people, right? So I can't share that with you. It's not interesting to you. But I had this ideal, but the thing about it is the ideal takes time, right? It takes time. But this ideal I got, I was going to have Gearhead Church. Gearhead Church. And it would only be on YouTube, you know, or maybe a website. And it would be Gearhead Church. And it would be like, I don't know, like you could say how to change a water pump, right? Maybe you don't know how to change a water pump. And so you'd click on that one. And when you did, I would show you how to change a water pump. This church would take place in a garage. I would show you how to change a water pump. But while I was showing you how to change a water pump, all along, I'd have these little blurbs about Christ and Jesus, and how the water pump and the flowing water relates to Jesus, the true water of life, and how a water pump cools better than a metal water pump, just as something else. And I would relate these different things as I'm showing you how to work. And then like next weekend, we might narrow a rear end or change a gear out in the back or put in a transmission. But we'd always be souping up and working on hot rods or motorcycles or something every week. And you could go there and you could watch it, and it would be Gearhead Church. And you'd be learning something about cars, but at the same time, you'd be picking up stuff about Jesus. I would call it gearhead church. And people that like cars and stuff, they come to church, they're bored, they would learn about Christ through gearhead church. I think that'd be cool. I look at this old factory at the other end of Winchester, and I think they've got a bunch of stuff in there now, but it's like the old hat factory. And I always look at that, and I think it would be so cool. I'd like to go in there and put a church in it. Pews and everything, but keep the factory look on the inside. Just make it really cool looking and keep the factory look. And have church there. Huge building. But I'd like to keep the factory look, and I'd like to call it the church factory. The SDA church factory. It'd be cool. I got a lot of ideas, see, but no time. A lot of ideas, but no time. Maybe you could tie them together. The church factory, gearhead church factory. Time. In Psalms 90, verses 9 through 12. Turn with me there, if you will. Psalms 90. Psalms 90. And I want to look at verses 9 through 12, or divisions 9 through 12. Psalms 90, 9 through 12. And here's what it says. For all of our days are passed away in your wrath, and we spend our years as a tale that is told. We spend our years as a tale that is told, like telling a little story. That's like your life. And isn't that strange? When you pass away and they have your funeral, you live a whole life, 60 or 70 or 80 years, and they have a summary of your life at a funeral, and it doesn't take 30 minutes. We're told as a little story. Verse 10, it says, in the days of our years are 70 years and 10, which is 70. And if by reason of strength, if we got really good health and we're blessed, 80 years, 80 years. So 70, he says, you're going to live 70 or 80 years. Yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away or vanish away like a dream. In verse 11 says, who knows the power of your anger, even according to your fear? So is thy wrath. In verse 12 here it says, so teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Teach us to count our days, that we can apply our hearts toward wisdom. Now, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Have you ever known somebody, how many of you know somebody that was smart? Raise your hand if you've known a smart person. Okay. How many of you have ever known a wise person? Raise your hand if you've known a wise person. I know several wise people. How many of you have ever known a smart and wise person? Yeah, that's the bingo right there, ain't it? How many of you have ever known a smart person that was not wise? How about this one? I know a couple of these. How many of you have ever known a wise person that was not very smart? I know a few of those. They're wise, but they're not very smart. They might not pass a geometry test or a physics class or something like that, but they're wise in what they do. I know Storm, he had a friend, and since they were little, and he always hung. Storm was the opposite. My son was very smart, made straight A's all through school, very smart. But he was very unwise. He would not act like he should, wouldn't listen to people, he was very smart, but not wise. And he had a friend, and they used to play together. There was actually three of them, but this one, he had another friend, he was really smart too. But this other one, he wasn't really smart. It was like all he could do to get through school. And when you talk to him, there's just nothing there, right? And I used to worry about him. I actually used to think, unbeknownst to me now, you learn so much as you grow older. I used to worry about him. I used to think, Storm's going to be fine. That other kid's going to be fine. But I don't, bless his heart. I just don't know about him. He's the best now. And what he has that they didn't have is he has wisdom. He has wisdom. You can tell him, I can say, now you go over here, you do this. When you get paid this week, you take this much money and you go here and this much money here. And you look out in the future now because and man, he will listen and he will follow that. He will follow that. It's almost like he thinks, I'm dumb, I better listen. I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, so I better listen to him, right? And when you get like that, that's the beginning of wisdom. I'm not the smartest person in the world, and I don't know everything, so I better listen to the Lord. That's the beginning of wisdom. That's what makes you so wise. They're very close, but not the same. Sort of like torque and horsepower. They're not exactly the same, but they're close. The average age in church, or average age period in the world is 39 years old. So if you're 39 or 40 years old, you're the average age. If you're less than 39, you're considered young. Right? That makes most of us in here are ancient. But interesting, the average church age is 55. I'm young. I'm a youngin'. And so I'm thinking that if you're in church, if you're a member of a church and you're not 55, then you're abnormally wise. Wise. 54% of church members are over 60. 54% of church members are over 60. The older we get, the wiser we get. I hope that's it. I hope it's not because we get old and we can't do the stuff we used to do, so we think, oh, I'll just go to church. I hope the older we get, the wiser we're getting. The wiser we're getting. You know, Jesus is our example. And Jesus did all this praying and all this work for God. I wonder about Jesus, because he worked 24 hours a day for the Lord and Savior. And I don't know, the Bible doesn't talk. I've heard some people say, well, he worked till he was 30 years old and he saved up a lot of money and he lived off that money the last 7 years, last 3.5 years of his ministry. He saved up all. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say that. But the man gave everything to God. He woke up, he ate, he slept, he breathed the Lord. It was all about, everything in his life was all directed to God. It was all about God and for God and with God and to God. And the Bible tells us that we should do all things to the glory of God. Do you do everything in your life? Is all your time directed to the glory of God? Jesus is our example. And a man spent countless hours in prayer, in work, in service, and he would set aside large gobs of time daily to go off by himself and pray to the Father. Are we doing that? Do we live our lives that way? Are we living like Jesus lived? And you can do it because Jesus walked around and he saw the fishermen and he's doing all these different things. And like I said, he related everything to God. You can go to work every day and you can be a Christian in a workplace. You can go visit people. You can be a Christian in the grocery store. You can be a Christian everywhere you go. You can glorify God with everything. Every time I have a conversation with somebody, I don't always get it in. But every time I have a conversation with somebody, I was talking to somebody just the other day. Every time I have a conversation with somebody, I'm looking for a hole to stick Jesus into. Every time. It may be some strangers you don't know. You're talking about business. And constantly from the time we start talking, I'm thinking, how can I stick Jesus in here? I wonder, I'm trying to read this person, right? I'm trying to read him. How can I stick Jesus in here? And sometimes people talking to me like, huh? What was you saying? How can I stick Jesus in there? How can I work Jesus in? I was telling somebody the story the other day. I was going to see this guy that I hadn't talked to. Actually, I hadn't talked to in years. And before I went, I prayed to God. I said, Lord, I said, make me a hole. I'm going to talk to this guy about something totally off topic that had nothing to do with the Lord. It was just business. I said, but make me a hole somehow. Because I was sitting thinking, how can I edge my way into Jesus? How can I get in the door? And so I go there and I said that prayer. And so I go there, I walk in. He says, hey man, how you doing? I said, fine, how you doing? He says, I hear you preaching now. God will open those doors if you will pray before you meet pray every day when you wake up in the morning. Say, dear Lord, give me a hole to stick Jesus into with everybody I talk to today. And then be looking and be ready for it because it'll happen. Jesus is our example. You know, Jesus knew that his time was short too. He tells us in the book of John 9, verses 4 and 5, he says, I must work while it is day. Right? I must work while it's day. He knows I got to get this work done. I got to get in. I got to get to work. There's this old guy one time, he was retired, and he didn't have a lot to do. He hung around the house a lot, sat out on the porch a lot. And he looked across the street, and he saw that they were marking off the ground and preparing the soil and everything. And he looked, it was a little bit off from his house, but he could see. And they started breaking ground and building. He figured out that it was going to be a big shopping mall. So he didn't have nothing to do. He thought it was interesting. So he strolled out there and he was looking, and he saw this guy, and this guy was working. I mean, he was just driving this machine around. He was working like he hadn't never seen anybody work before. And it was just amazing, the work that he was doing with the machine. It was perfect. He piled everything perfect. He stacked everything perfect. It was like he never took a break. He was just going at it the whole time. Man, he was watching him, and he got closer, and he watched him, and he was just tucking away with this guy. And he worked right up to the time to start, right up to 5 o'clock sharp every day. And he would park his stuff just perfectly, just so fine. He would get in his car and he would leave. And he said, man, it's so interesting. He liked watching him work. And he'd come back the next day, and he stood there and he would watch. And he was just getting a kick out of watching them putting them all up and stuff. He watched him for like 2 or 3 months there, build that big old building. He watched this guy every day. And this guy was just a perfect worker, man. He was just everything. And he's like, he never took a break. He was just like a robot, man. He was just on it. He was good. And he was just amazed at this guy's work ethic and how good of a job he did. And he come back every day, and he watched every day until they got the whole mall built up. They got the whole mall put together, everything. That guy went around, he cleaned up everything, put everything up in the truck, packed everything up just perfectly and stuff. And they was ready to go. And the guy was just taken away, and he knew they was fixing to leave, and his entertainment was going to be gone. And so that old guy, he strolled over there to where he was. He says, hey. And the guy come walking over. He says, man, I just wanted to tell you that I'm taken away with what you done here. He says, I've been watching stuff. He says, yeah, I know. He says, I've been watching everything. He says, that's interesting. He says, I hate that it's over. He says, he said, I retired several years back, and I like coming out here just watching you work every day. He says, you're not the supervisor? And Jesus, your supervisor, he's always watching. It's real with Jesus. He is the supervisor. He's always watching, man. You're always on the clock. And you should live for the Lord and work for the Lord and pray for the Lord and witness for the Lord. Your time is crucial and it's vital. And you don't have a lot of it. It seems like you do when you're young, but the older you get, the less of it you know. I will say one thing, and then I'll hush. I want you to turn with me to 2 Chronicles in the Old Testament. I just got a little bit here, and I'll leave you alone. I got a lot more, but I'll just leave this little bit. This is the danger. When I don't know what I'm going to preach on, the danger is I don't hush. 2 Chronicles 33. 2 Chronicles 33. And time is like, I was thinking about this. I was with Amanda one day, and we were watching American Pickers. This has been some time ago. We were watching American Pickers, and they had this old hit and miss engine. I don't know if all of you know what a hit and miss engine, but it was an old hit and miss engine. And back in the early 1900s, farmers used to use it to run pumps and all kinds of different things. And they're really neat, and they're most of them are really old. And so they were looking at this hit and miss engine on American Pickers. And I told Amanda, I said, I've always wanted one of them hit and miss engines. I'd like to have one to fiddle around with it and play with it. And she says, we got one of them. And I said, huh? And she says, yeah. She says, we got one. She says, it's sitting in a fence row out of my granny's. And I said, no. She said, yeah. And so sure enough, we went out there, and there it was, sitting in a fence row, just like she said. So I loaded that thing up and took it, right? And I still don't have it together yet, but I've got it sandblasted down and everything. I don't have time. And so it was just laying there. Didn't know how valuable it was. It was very valuable to me. Very valuable, just laying there. I remember one day I was sitting at home and it came to me. I remember when I was a kid, my dad had this old traffic light. It was a real traffic light that hangs out here. And he had it like in different places. I remembered it in our lifetime. Like he'd have it in the corner of a garage or through over here, through over there. And I was just sitting there and it just come to me. And I woke up and I thought, where is that traffic light? So I went to my mom and dad's. I said, Dad, you remember that traffic light that you had? I said, when I was a kid, I remember seeing the light. He said, yeah, I remember. I said, well, where is that at? He said, yeah, I still got it. I said, where? He said, it's out there in the barn somewhere. And so I went and ran to the barn and I dug around and I found this old traffic light. It had rat's nest and everything. I mean, it was like, and so I took it home, cleaned it up good, painted it and everything. I even put electric in it where the lights flash and I got them timed and stuff, hung it up. Valuable. Me, valuable. Right? And then I remember I got this old pedal car. I call them mantiques. I like this kind of stuff, American pickers. I got this old pedal car. But I remember when I was a kid, one time in the woods, me and my dad, we found this old pedal car just sitting out there. And it was all rusty and everything. It was old. It was from, looking back, knowing what I know now, it's from like the 30s. And I said, I want to get that pedal car. I said, I want that. He says, you don't get that pile of junk. Leave it laying there. And I said, oh, but Dad, I said, I want it. He said, what are you going to do with that pedal car? I said, I'll fix it up. Fix it up. It's cool, man. And he says, all right. And we took it home against his judgment and will. And I remember I was aggravating him about fixing it up. And it didn't have, the tires on it had rotted off. And I said, I don't know what to do about tires. And I remember this, because I just remember, what a cool idea. He got some black rubber hose, and cut it just right, and we wrapped it around there and glued it on the wheels and made rubber tires for it. So anyway, it laid around there for a while. I thought it was the coolest thing. And I guess a couple of years. And he got tired of it. It was in his way. He says, I'm going to throw that thing away. Is that all right with you? And I thought at the time, I thought, well, yeah, I don't be aggravated with it. He wants to throw it away. I said, okay. And so he threw it away. I wish I had that pedal car back. Wish I had it. And that's the way our time is. You don't realize how valuable your time is until you need it. When you need it or you want it for something, you wish you had that time back. I tell you, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I could have done or should have done, or if I could go back, what I would change or what I would fix. But what you can do is you can live every day and every minute in the future the way you should live it for the Lord, and you won't have to worry about that. 2 Chronicles, chapter 33. And I like this story. Sometimes you can witness to someone. You can invite someone to church. You can talk to them about Jesus. And they'll even tell you they're coming. Or maybe they'll tell you that they want Bible study. Or maybe they'll do a little bit of Bible study and quit, or come to church for a little while and drop out. And I like this story. It's actually one of my favorite stories. I like stories in the Bible about people that are losers and they become winners. I'm a big underdog person. And this story here in 2 Chronicles chapter 33 is about Manasseh. And it says here, starting out, it says, when he was 12 years old, he began to reign, and he reigned for 55 years in Jerusalem. You know, he reigned longer than any other king. He was the longest. And I think there's a reason for that, because God is long-suffering. And this guy was really good. Look at the stuff he did. Verse 2, it says, but he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. And he was like the abominations of the heathen. In verse 3, it says, he built again high places and worshiped Balaam. In verse 4, it says he built altars in the house of the Lord, but they were for pagan gods. In verse 5, it says he built altars for the host of heaven in 2 courts. The host of heaven, that's not our, Mars, Venus, Jupiter. Verse 6, it says he caused his children to pass through the fire. Verse 7, it says, and he set a carved image idol, which he had made in the house of God. This is a bad dude. As a matter of fact, the Bible says he was the worst ever. He was the worst ever. And so it says here in verse 9, it says, and Manasseh made Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to err and to do worse than the heathen, whom the Lord had destroyed before the children of Israel. Verse 10, it says, and the Lord spake to Manasseh and to his people, but they would not listen. Bad guy. But then right here in verse 11, it says, wherefore the Lord brought upon them the captains of the host of the king of Assyria, which took Manasseh among the thorns and bound him with fetters and carried him to Babylon. Now that thorn that it's talking about there is actually a hook that they stuck through Manasseh's nose and stuck a hook and a ring on it and took him to Babylon. Bad guy. Get him. But then it says in verse 12, this is why I like the story. In verse 12 it says, and when he was afflicted, he besought the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. And he prayed unto him, and he was entreated of him. And God heard his supplication and brought him again back to Jerusalem to his kingdom. And Manasseh knew the Lord was God. And after that, he built a wall around the city of David. In verse 15, he took away the strange gods and the idols out of the house of the Lord. In verse 16, he repaired the altar of the Lord and sacrificed their own peace offerings and thank offerings. He changed. God stretched him and changed his life. I believe that's the reason he reigned for 55 years. Because God was long suffering with old Manasseh. And if he can change, if the worst can change, anybody can do it. If King David can do what he did and come out of it, you can do it. If Manasseh can do what he did and come out, if old Samson was wicked in his ways but changed, you can too. But not only you, but anybody. And I got a lot of projects. like that old hit MS engine that have been sitting there, and I'll work on them for a little while, and then they may sit there for a year or two, and then I'll work on them again. And they may sit there for another year or two, and I'll deal with that over this and that. Because I don't have the time. But I don't give up. And a lot of that stuff, eventually I'll finish it. But it's a work in progress. We're works in progress. And all the people around us are works in progress. If you're trying to reach a brother or a sister or a coworker or a friend or a son or a daughter, don't give up on them. We want to do like Jesus did. We want to walk through Walmart and say, "Thou follow me." Say, "Thou follow me." And they just start following you. And it don't work that way. It don't work that way. It's your job. We talked about planting seeds this morning in Sabbath school. It's your job to plant the seed. Plant the seed and do the work and find the holes to stick Jesus in. That's all you can do. The rest is up to the Holy Spirit. But the rest is not really even up to the Holy Spirit. He's going to try harder than you are, but it ultimately comes down to that person. Are they going to make the decision to follow God? Are they going to make the decision to accept what's been given to them and offered to them? Time is critical. But the most important thing is don't quit and don't give up. You know, Jesus makes a statement. He says, "Be ye perfect as I am perfect." Now that's hard to follow, ain't it? Unless you're perfect. People like that. The devil likes to use it that way. Unless you are as perfect as Jesus Christ, you can't enter heaven. Now, I don't see it that way. I believe we're responsible. And here's the way let me explain that to you. And I'll leave you alone. I promise I'll leave you alone this time. I'll hush. But if Charlene comes to me today and she says, "Quentin, tomorrow afternoon, after the board meeting, after the business meeting tomorrow afternoon, I got a lady who's going to meet me out here on the street. And she's 95. And we're going to have a foot race." And she says she can take me. But I don't think she can. And we're going to run the 20-yard dash. And we're going to run the 20-yard dash tomorrow. And she says, Quentin, what do you think? I'm going to say, Charlene, I think you can take her too. Right? She's 95 years old. We can take her. And she says she's also on one of them walkers. I said, Charlene, I think we can take her. And she said, I don't know, Quentin. She's pretty fast on that walker. I said, I think we can take her. It's got one of them with the wheels on the back. I think we can take her. I think I can too. What do y'all rate? We're racing for big money. 20 yards. I'm going to say, Charlene, I'm going to tell you something. I want you to run like the wind. I want you to run like the wind. I want you to run like a streak of lightning. Do you hear me? She'll say, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I'll say, run like the wind. She said, I'll do it. I'll do it. So sure enough, the day comes, and they line up out here, and they're getting ready to race. And they get down, and they get ready. You know, they're ready to go, and they're ready, and they're running, and the gun snaps, pow, and they take off. Right? And the whole time that they're going, I'm screaming and hollering, Charlene, run like the wind, girl. You can do it. Run like a streak of lightning. Look at her go, y'all. She's turning it up. She's going. You go. You can do it. And so she's down there, she's giving it everything she's got. She's going at it, man. She's going, and the other lady's over there in the walker, chikinku, chikinku, chikinku. And she's pretty fast, chikinku, chikinku. And they're just like neck and neck, and they're trying, and she's going, and she gets to the end, and Charlene just gives it everything she's got, and she gets ahead, and she crosses the line. First, did Charlene run like the wind? Did she really run like a streak of lightning? But that's what I told her. You can do it. You can run like lightning. You can do it. Obtain that. Go for that. Strive for that. Don't stop. And she gives it everything that she's possibly got. And I'm standing there on the sideline hollering her through, and I'm Jesus, and she couldn't have done it without me. And she crosses that line and she wins. And that is what it's all about. You take everything you've got and you spend all the time you have and you give everything you can to the Lord and for the Lord and with the Lord, and you'll win. Don't worry about anything else. You will win. You give 100%. And at the end of the day, if by some chance you didn't make it, but you will. If you don't make it, you can say, man, there was nothing else I could have done. And you can be satisfied. But if you give everything you got, that's all you can give. And you'll be blessed. And you'll make it. And I want to encourage you today to give your all to the Lord. Your whole heart to Jesus. Take him seriously and give all the time that you can give to the Lord. And whatever you're doing, wherever it's at, if you're working on something or building something or talking to a stranger or shopping in the store, make all of it about Jesus. Get to where your brain thinks that way. Think about it. I love you. Thank you. And I'll hush now. Let's sing our closing hymn. Our closing hymn this day, which is number 593. Let's all stand.